So I've memorized all 720 pages, which is why I don't have a copy of the book. No, you make Xeroxes. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'm thrilled to be in this company. And I'm going to be reading a little bit from the middle of the book, and this is shortly after the protagonist, Jude, ends a disastrous first relationship. There were two ways of forgetting. For many years, he had envisioned, unimaginatively, a vault, and at the end of the day, he would gather the images and sequences and words that he didn't want to think about again, and open the heavy steel door only enough to hurry them inside, closing it quickly and tightly. But this method wasn't effective. The memories seeped out anyway. The important thing, he came to realize, was to eliminate them, not just to store them. So he had invented some solutions. For small memories, little slights, insults, you relived them again and again until they were neutralized, until they became near meaningless with repetition, or until you could believe that they were something that had happened to someone else and you had just heard about it. For larger memories, you held the scene in your head like a film strip, and then you began to erase it, frame by frame. Neither method was easy. You couldn't stop in the middle of your erasing and examine what you were looking at, for example. You couldn't start scrolling through parts of it and hope you wouldn't get ensnared in the details of what had happened, because you of course would. You had to work at it every night until it was completely gone. Though they never disappeared completely, of course, but they were at least more distant. They weren't things that followed you, wraith-like, tugging at you for attention, jumping in front of you when you ignored them, demanding so much of your time and effort that it became impossible to think of anything else. In fallow periods, the moments before you fell asleep, the minutes before you were landing after an overnight flight, when you weren't awake enough to do work and weren't tired enough to sleep, they would reassert themselves. And so it was best to imagine then a screen of white, huge and light-lit and still, and hold it in your mind like a shield. In the weeks following the beating, he worked on forgetting Caleb. Before going to bed, he went to the door of his apartment and, feeling foolish, tried forcing his old set of keys into the locks to assure himself that they didn't fit, that he really was once again safe. He set and reset the alarm system he had installed, which was so sensitive that even passing shadows triggered a flurry of beeps. And then he lay awake, his eyes open in the dark room, concentrating on forgetting. But it was so difficult. There were so many memories from those months that stabbed at him that he was overwhelmed. He heard Caleb's voice saying things to him. He saw the expression on Caleb's face as he stared at his unclothed body. He felt the horrid blank airlessness of his fall down the staircase, and he crunched himself into a knot and put his hands over his ears and closed his eyes. Finally, he would get up and go to his office at the other end of the apartment and work. He had a big case coming up, and he was grateful for it. His days were so occupied that he had little time to think of anything else. For a while, he was hardly going home at all, just 2 hours to sleep and an hour to shower and change, until one evening he'd had an episode at work, a bad one, the first time he ever had. The night janitor had found him on the floor and had called the building security department, who had called the firm's chairman, a man named Peterson Tremaine, who had called Lucian, who was the only one he had told what to do in case something like this should happen. Lucian had called Andy, and then both he and the chairman had come into the office and waited with him for Andy to arrive. He had seen them, seen their feet, and even as he had gasped and writhed on the ground, he had tried to find the energy to beg them to leave, to reassure them that he was fine, that he just needed to be left alone. But they hadn't left, and Lucian had wiped the vomit from his mouth, and then sat on the floor near his head and held his hand, and he had been so embarrassed he had almost cried. Later, he had told them again and again that it was nothing, that this happened all the time. But they had made him take the rest of the week off, and the following Monday, Lucian had told him that they were making him go home at a reasonable hour, midnight on the weekdays, 9 p.m. on the weekends. "Lucian," he'd said, frustrated, "this is ridiculous. I'm not a child." He had fought and fought with him, but it hadn't made a difference. At midnight, his office lights abruptly clicked off, and he had at last resigned himself to going home when he had been told. Since the Caleb incident, he had barely been able to talk to Harold. Even seeing him was a kind of torture. This made Harold and Julia's visits, which were increasingly frequent, challenging. He could feel Harold trying to treat him the same as he had, but something had shifted. No longer did Harold harass him about Rose and Pritchard. No longer did he ask him about what it was like to abet corporate malfeasance. And he certainly never mentioned the possibility that he might settle down with someone. Now his questions are about how he felt. How was he? How was he feeling? How were his legs? Had he been tiring himself out? Had he been using the chair a lot? Did he need help with anything? And he always answered the exact same way. Fine, fine, fine. No, no, no. Thank you.